Picture a bustling port in Rotterdam, cranes swinging steel containers onto ships bound for every corner of the globe, the air thick with salt and diesel. Now imagine those same cranes slowing to a crawl, workers glancing nervously at half-empty docks. What if I told you Europe, the continent you've dismissed as a fading relic, is quietly clawing its way back to the top of the economic heap, threatening to leave the United States scrambling to catch up? Yeah, you heard that right. The land of ancient castles and endless bureaucracy might just be staging a comeback that rewrites the global playbook. So stick with me, because this isn't some dry econ lecture. This is a story of ambition, desperation, and a seismic shift happening right now in February 2025. Let's rewind the clock a bit. Take you back to a time when Europe wasn't just a player, it was the game. After World War II, the continent was a smoldering wreck, cities like Berlin and Warsaw reduced to rubble. But out of that ash rose an economic miracle. By the 1950s and 60s, West Germany's Wirtschaftswunder, the economic wonder, saw factories churning out Volkswagens and steel at a pace that made jaws drop. France rebuilt its infrastructure with lightning speed, and the European coal and steel community laid the groundwork for what we now call the EU. Trade boomed. Ports, like Hamburg and Antwerp, became arteries pumping goods across borders. By 1970, Europe's GDP was climbing fast. Western Europe alone accounted for nearly 30% of global output. According to the World Bank, the US was still king, sure, but Europe was the scrappy contender nobody could ignore. Fast forward to the 90s, the Berlin Wall falls, the EU takes shape, and suddenly you've got a single market with 300 million consumers. No tariffs, no checkpoints, just pure economic horsepower. The euro launches in 1999. And for a minute, it feels like Europe's about to lap the world. Goldman Sachs analysts back then predicted the Eurozone could rival the US economy. By 2020, spoiler alert, that didn't happen. So what went wrong? Well, imagine a machine running hot. Too many cooks in the kitchen. Too many gears grinding against each other. The 2008 financial crash hit like a sledgehammer. Greece's debt crisis exposed cracks in the Eurozone's armor. Banks teetered. Unemployment spiked. Spain hit 26% in 2013, per Eurostat. And the US, despite its own wounds, bounced back faster with bold stimulus and a tech boom. Europe, meanwhile, got bogged down in austerity debates. Germany preaching fiscal discipline while southern nations begged for breathing room. The result? A lost decade. Growth stalled at 1–2% annually, while the US roared ahead at 3%. By 2023, the IMF pegged US GDP at $26.9 trillion, dwarfing the EU's $18.1 trillion. And here's a stat to chew on. Between 2010 and 2020, Europe's share of global tech patents dropped from 19% to 13%, per the European Patent Office. Silicon Valley was eating their lunch. Meanwhile, $330 billion in capital fled Europe for US markets in 2024. Alone, according to Bloomberg, investors betting on Tesla over Airbus, Apple over Nokia's Ghost. But don't count Europe out yet, because something's stirring. Picture this. It's January 30th, 2025. Frankfurt's skyline glints under a gray winter sky. Inside the European Central Bank's sleek tower, President Christine Lagarde drops a bombshell. The ECB slashes its key interest rate by 1/4 point to 2.75%, the fifth cut since June 2024. Why? Because the Eurozone's flatlining. Zero growth in Q4 2024. Germany shrinking 0.2%. France limping at 0.1%, per Eurostat's latest flash estimate. But Lagarde's not panicking. She's playing chess. Rising real incomes and fading monetary tightness will lift demand, she says, hinting at more cuts to come. Markets buzz. Reuters reports traders betting on rates hitting 2% by mid-2025, maybe 1.5% by year-end. Cheaper loans. More investment. A spark to jolt Europe awake. And it's not just talk. Zoom out to Brussels, where the European Commission's Ursula von der Leyen is flexing muscle. December 2024, she seals a blockbuster trade deal with Mercosur, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay. After 25 years of haggling, Politico calls it a lifeline, slashing tariffs on EU cars, wine, and tech, opening a market of 270 million people. The Commission estimates it'll boost EU exports by $100 billion over a decade. And here's the kicker. It's a hedge against U.S. tariffs, with Trump back in the White House as of January 20, 2025, threatening 10 to 20% levies on European goods. Reuters says EU leaders saw this coming. They're pivoting fast. But can they pull it off? Let's paint the scene. Germany's Ruhr Valley, once the coal and steel heart of Europe, now humming with green tech. Siemens ramps up wind turbine production. Spain's sun-scorched plains sprout solar farms feeding 10% of the EU's grid, per the International Energy Agency. Portugal's growing at 1.5%, top of the pack. While Ireland's tech hubs churn out software, the ECB's rate cuts are oil on the fire. Businesses borrowing again, consumers spending. But it's not all rosy. Rewind to 2024. Germany's economy shrank for 2 straight years. The engine of Europe coughing smoke, France's political chaos, Macron's coalition wobbling, drags confidence down. And then there's Trump. His tariff threats loom like storm clouds. The IMF warns a full-blown trade war could shave 0.8% off global GDP, Europe included. So, why should you care? Because this isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's your groceries getting pricier, your car payment spiking, or maybe your job shifting across the Atlantic. Europe's gamble could flip the script, but it's a tightrope walk. Back in the 90s, the EU's single market was a marvel. 500 million people by 2025. No borders. One currency. Imagine that power unleashed again. The Commission's competitiveness compass, rolled out in January 2025, promises just that. Deregulation, green investment, a $704 billion push to outpace the US in renewables. Per Euronews, von der Leyen's betting on it. We must make our economy more productive, more competitive, she says. But here's the question hanging in the air. Can Europe shake off its baggage, the red tape, the infighting, the ghosts of crises past? Or will this be another false dawn? Think about it. The US has ruled the roost since 1945. 80 years of dollar dominance, military might, cultural clout. But what if Europe's waking up, not just to survive but to lead? Rewind to 2000. Nokia owned 30% of the global phone market. Airbus was neck and neck with Boeing. Europe had swagger. Then it stumbled. Regulation choked startups. Energy costs soared. Russia's war in Ukraine spiked gas prices 300% in 2022. Per Trading Economics, the US pivoted to fracking. Europe didn't. Now, though, the tide's turning. February 2025. Spain's wind farms hit record output. 15 gigawatts, enough to power 12 million homes per Iberdrola. Poland's factories crank out batteries for electric cars. Greece, yes, Greece, grows 2.1% this year, says the IMF, driven by tourism and EU recovery funds. It's messy, uneven, but it's motion, and motion means possibility. So let's zoom in. Imagine walking through Lisbon's Old Quarter, trams rattling past but nearby, new co-working spaces buzz with coders, or stroll Berlin's Meet, where startups sip $5 lattes and plot to outcode Silicon Valley. This isn't the Europe of dusty museums. It's a continent clawing for relevance. The ECB's Lagarde says, weakness is all around us. But she's wrong. Pockets of strength are flaring. Eurostat's 2024 data shows employment hitting 75.8%. A record. Wages inching up 3%. Inflation cooling to 2.1%, just above the ECB's target. It's not a boom, but it's a pulse. And here's where it gets juicy. Europe's not waiting for permission. The Mercosur deals a middle finger to US protectionism. A signal they'll trade with anyone, anywhere. X posts from February. 23 light up with chatter. CDU's Friedrich Merz saying Europe should cut the cord from the US, economically and politically. Bold words, risky play. But it's got teeth. The EU's $18 trillion economy isn't chump change. And with 27 nations rowing together, sometimes they've got leverage. So ask yourself, could this be the moment Europe stops playing catch-up? The US grew 2.7% in 2024, per the Fed, but Europe's creeping toward 1.1% in 2025. Says the ECB, narrow the gap, shift the power. It's not fantasy. Last year, EU exports to Asia jumped 8%, per the Commission, while US exports dipped 2%, tariffs or not. Europe's finding new dance partners, but the clock's ticking. Germany's 0.3% growth forecast for 2025, slashed from 1.1% per Xinhua, screams fragility. France's farmers riot over Mercosur beef imports. Macron's digging in to block it. Per Politico, unity's shaky, and Trump's tariff threats. 10% on EU steel, 20% on cars. Could hit $50 billion in trade. Per Bloomberg, Europe's prepping. Von der Leyen's team drafts retaliation plans. But can they hold the line? Rewind to 2016. Brexit punched a hole in the EU's hull. Britain's out. Growing. 1.6% in 2025 per the IMF. But the EU's still 448 million strong, a market the US can't ignore. Yet here's the rub. Europe's spent decades in America's shadow. Culturally, economically, militarily, the dollar's king. Hollywood rules, NATO's US-led. But what if Europe's had enough? The ECB's rate cuts, Mercosur handshake, green tech push. They're not begging for scraps. They're building a table. So stick with me. Because this story's just heating up. Is Europe's shift a mirage or the dawn of something massive? Let's find out together. So, we've set the stage. Europe's stirring, shaking off decades of rust. But now, let's peel back the curtain. Because what's happening in February 2025 isn't just a flicker of hope. It's a full-on power play that could rewrite the global pecking order. Imagine this. Germany's industrial heartland, the Ruhr, once choking on coal dust, now buzzing with a new pulse. Siemens cranking out wind turbines so fast they're shipping them to Asia before the paint dries. Over in Spain, sun-baked Andalusias, sprouting solar farms like wildflowers, pumping out 20 gigawatts last month alone. That's enough juice for 15 million homes. According to Iberdrola's latest figures, and France. Yeah, the land of croissants and strikes. Emmanuel Macron's slashing red tape with a gusto nobody saw coming. A February 18th Le Monde report says he's fast-tracking permits for green startups, cutting approval times from 18 months to 6. Why? Because Europe's not just waking up, it's sprinting, and the numbers don't lie. The European Central Bank's January 2025 forecast pegs Eurozone growth at 1.1% this year, up from a measly 0.8% in 2024. It's not a moonshot, but it's momentum. And here's the kicker. While the US is flexing with Trump's tariffs, threatening 10% on EU steel, 20% on cars, per his February 3rd CNBC interview, Europe's not flinching, they're doubling down. Take the Mercosur deal. Inked December 2024, after a quarter century of talks. It's a $100 billion lifeline, per the European Commission, opening South America's 270 million consumers to EU goods. Think BMWs rolling into São Paulo, Rioja wine flooding Buenos Aires. It's a slap at US protectionism. A signal Europe's done begging for scraps, and it's working. EU exports to Asia spiked 8% in 2024, per Eurostat, while US exports dipped 2%. Tariffs be damned. But let's zoom in. Because this isn't some rosy fairy tale. It's gritty. Picture Poland's factory floors. Krakow's industrial parks humming with lithium-ion battery lines, feeding Tesla's European gigs. Outputs up 12% since last year, says Poland's stats office. Then there's Denmark. Wind whipping across the North Sea. Turbines off Copenhagen spinning out 40% of the nation's power, per Energinet's February data. It's not just green vibes. Denmark's GDP ticked up 1.3% last quarter, outpacing Germany's flatline. And here's where it gets wild. Europe's not just building, they're outmaneuvering. The EU's $704 billion green investment plan, dubbed the Competitiveness Compass by Ursula von der Leyen, isn't a slogan. It's a war chest. January 2025. Euronews reports they've funneled $120 billion into renewables already. Solar, wind, hydrogen, aiming to leapfrog the US in the climate race. The International Energy Agency says Europe's on track to hit 35% renewable energy by 2030, while the US lags at 28%. Trump's drill, baby, drill mantra echoing hollow as oil rigs churn but green tech stalls. And speaking of stalling, let's talk Trump. His tariff threats aren't a bluff. February 2nd, he tells the BBC the EU's trade deficit with the US, $155.8 billion in 2023 per Eurostat, is an atrocity. He's gunning for autos. Germany's $56 billion car exports to the US in 2023, per Oxford Economics, could shrink 30% if that 20% tariff lands. Volkswagen's sweating, BMW scrambling, but Europe's not folding. Von der Leyen fires back February 3rd via Reuters, will respond firmly, hinting at retaliatory tariffs on US bourbon, Harley-Davidsons, maybe even LNG. It's a chess move. Hurt America where it stings, and here's the shocker. Europe might not need the US as much as you think. Rewind to 2023, the US was 20% of EU goods exports, $502.3 billion per the Commission. But that's down from 25% a decade ago. They're pivoting. Mercosur, India talks relaunched January 21st. Per Euronews, Malaysia next. It's a diversification blitz, and it's paying off. Spain's growth hit 0.5% last quarter, per Bank of America. While Germany's flat, France shrinks 0.1%. The block's uneven, sure, but the winners are pulling ahead. Now imagine this. Port of Rotterdam, Europe's biggest. Ships clogging the docks. Not with US imports, but exports to Brazil, China, Japan. Throughputs up 7% since the Mercosur deal, per Port Authority stats. It's a middle finger to Trump's walls. And here's where it gets juicy. Employment's roaring. Eurostat's 2024 wrap shows 75.8% of Europeans working. A record. Wages up 3%. Inflation's tame at 2.1%, just above the ECB's 2% sweet spot. ECB Chief Christine Lagarde's not messing. Around February 7th, she tells CNBC rates are dropping again Thursday, from 2.75% to 2.5%. The fifth cut since June 2024. Why? To juice demand, spark investment, keep the engine humming. And it's working. Ireland's tech hubs, Dublin Silicon Docks, churn out software for global giants, growing 4% last year. Per IDA Ireland, Slovakia's car plants, Greece's tourism boom, 2.1% growth per the IMF. It's not uniform, but it's a pulse. And here's the twist. Europe's not just growing, they're stealing the US's thunder. Think about it. The US grew 2.7% in 2024, Fed data, but Europe's closing the gap. And with Trump's tariffs looming, the IMF warns February 14th, via NYT, a trade war could slice 0.8% off global GDP. Europe's prepping. Von der Leyen's team drafts retaliation, but they're also pivoting. X buzzes February 23rd with German CDU leader Friedrich Merz saying Europe should cut the cord from the US. Economically, Politically, risky, bold, but maybe genius. And here's the midway gut punch. Don't click away, because this could spark a US manufacturing meltdown. Picture it. EU tariffs hit US factories. Supply chains snag. Prices spike. Could Europe's shift leave America reeling? Stick around, because the stakes are sky high. Let's zoom out. The EU's single market, 448 million strong, isn't just a trade bloc. It's a beast, deregulating. Von der Leyen's January compass cuts red tape by 25% for small firms. Per the Commission, green tech's the ace. Spain's solar output doubled since 2022. Poland's battery exports tripled, and France's hydrogen projects, 10 gigawatts by 2030, per EDF, could power half of Paris. It's a flex. Europe's not waiting for US permission. They're building. And here's the data drop. EU goods exports to the US face a 10% tariff hit, per Euronews October 2024, costing 0.2% global GDP. But Goldman Sachs says Europe's green push could offset that, boosting EPS 6 to 7% by 2026. It's a gamble. Germany's auto sector's exposed. Italy's too. But the shift's bigger. Mercosur's $100 billion over a decade dwarfs the $50 billion Trump's tariffs might nick. Per Bloomberg, and Asia's hungry. EU exports there jumped $40 billion in 2024. China's buying. India's next. It's a pivot that could flip the script. So imagine this. Trump's tariffs land. US consumers pay $100 more yearly. Per UBS. EU goods get pricier. But Europe's not blinking. They're rerouting, rebuilding, rethinking. Von der Leyen's in Brussels February 24th. Meeting Lagarde. Plotting, per Politico. Not about rates. About trade, survival, supremacy. And here's the wild card. Energy. Europe's weaning off Russia. US LNG filled the gap. $70 billion deficit in 2023, per the Commission. But Spain's solar, Denmark's wind, Germany's hydrogen, they're cutting that cord too. The IEA says Europe's renewable share hit 32% last year, US at 22%. Trump's oil obsession might backfire, because Europe's not just competing, they're leapfrogging. So ask yourself, could this be the moment Europe doesn't just catch up, but pulls ahead? The US grew fat on post-war dominance, but Europe's lean, hungry, and moving. Germany's factories might stutter. 0.3% growth in 2025, per Xinhua. But Spain, Poland, Ireland, they're racing. And the EU's betting big, $704 billion big, that this shift sticks. It's not perfect. France's riots over Mercosur, beef imports, per Politico. February 20th, Macron's wobbling. Germany's car giants quake, but the bloc's not breaking. They're bending, adapting, winning. So, hang on, because this story's about to explode. So, we've seen Europe flexing, pivoting, clawing its way out of the US's shadow. But now let's drop the hammer, because what's unfolding in February 2025 isn't just a shift. It's a power flip that could leave America staring at the rearview mirror. Picture this. Brussels, February 24th, a sleek conference room in the European Commission's Berlaymont HQ. Ursula von der Leyen's not just sipping espresso, she's rolling out a bombshell. Whispers leak via Politico that the EU's eyeing a unified tech fund, $200 billion by 2030, to rival China and Silicon Valley. Think about it. Europe's been a tech laggard. Nokia's ashes still smoldering, but now they're swinging. Germany's SAP, France's Dassault, Netherlands' ASML, chip-making kings, teaming up. The kicker. X buzzes February 23rd with insiders claiming this fund's real target isn't just growth, it's independence. Cutting reliance on US semiconductors, software, AI. Imagine that. Europe, not just catching up, but leapfrogging. And here's the twist you didn't see coming. What if by 2030, it's the US begging for EU tech, not the other way around. Rewind a sec. 2024. US firms like Intel and Nvidia owned 60% of global chip revenue, per Statista. Europe's ASML just made the machines. But now, von der Leyen's play could flip that script. ASML's EUV lithography gear, $200 million a pop, powers every cutting-edge chip. And Europe's doubling down. Eurostat says 2024 tech R&D hit $350 billion, up 10% from 2023, closing the gap with the US's $600 billion duel. It's not parity, but it's a sprint. And here's the gut punch. Trump's tariffs might have sparked this. His February through threat, 10% on EU steel, 20% on cars, lit a fire. Reuters says the EU's counterplan isn't just retaliation, it's reinvention. Von der Leyen's team drafts levies on US LNG, coal, soybeans, $20 billion worth, per Bloomberg. February 15th, but the real play's bigger. Mercosur's $100 billion lifeline. India talks relaunched January 21st. Euronews says a deal's close. $50 billion yearly by 2035. Europe's not cornered. They're circling new prey. And the data backs it. ECB's February forecast holds 1.1% growth in 2025. But Goldman Sachs whispers 1.5% by 2026. If green tech and trade stick, US, meanwhile, stalls. Fed's 2.7% in 2024 dips to 2.5% in 2025. Per IMF, February 20. Why? Tariffs choke supply chains. UBS says US households face $1,200 extra yearly. Inflation ticks up. Europe's dodging that bullet. Spain's solar farms hit 22 gigawatts last month. Per Iberdrola. Poland's battery exports triple since 2022. Denmark's wind powers 40% of its grid. Energinet's latest. It's a green revolution with teeth. And here's the wild card. Iran. Yeah, Iran. February 19th. Reuters reports Tehran's oil exports wobble. Sanctions tighten under Trump. OPEC Plus cuts loom. EU imports from Iran tanked 50% since 2023. But Europe's not sweating. Russia's gas is down to 8% of EU supply. Per the Commission, US LNG filled the gap. $70 billion deficit in 2023. But Spain's renewables, Germany's hydrogen, 10 gigawatts by 2030, per EDF. Cut that cord. The IEA says Europe's renewable share hits 35% by 2030. US at 28%. Trump's oil obsession might have misread the room because Europe's not just surviving, they're thriving. Zoom in. Employment's the sleeper hit. Eurostat's 2024 record, 75.8% working, holds into 2025. Wages up 3%. Inflation steady at 2.1%. ECB's laggard cuts rates again February 27, 2.5% to 2.25% per CNBC. Juice keeps flowing. Ireland's tech grows 4%. Greece 2.1%. Poland 1.8%. Per IMF, Germany's flat, 0.3%. But the block's not breaking, it's bending. And here's the jaw-dropper. The single market, 448 million strong, could double its punch. January's competitiveness compass slashes red tape, 25% for small firms. Per the Commission, if it scales. Oxford Economics says EU GDP could hit $25 trillion by 2040, $800 billion yearly in trade gains. US at $30 trillion, sure, but the gap narrows, and Europe's not waiting. Mercosur's live. Asia's buying. Africa's next. $300 billion global gateway plan per Euronews. Outbids China's Belt and Road. It's a flex. Europe's not a junior partner, they're a rival. So picture this. Trump's tariffs land, US auto plants stutter, EU goods get pricier, but Volkswagen shifts to Brazil, Airbus to India. X lights up February 22nd, with German MP Friedrich Merz saying, "America's not our future, It's our past. Bold, brash, maybe prophetic, and here's the stakes. US manufacturing's exposed. Tariffs could cut EU imports by $50 billion per Bloomberg. But Europe's green push offsets it. 6 to 7% EPS gains by 2026. Per Goldman Sachs, US firms scramble. Ford's EU sales dip 5% in 2024. Per AKA, GM's next. Europe's not just holding ground, they're gaining. And now the clincher. What if this sticks? Imagine 2030. EU tech rivals China. Green energy powers half the block. Trade flows bypass the US. The dollar wobbles. 15% of global reserves in 2025, down from 20% in 2015, per IMF. Euro climbs. Swift data shows euro payments up 5% since 2023. It's not dominance, but it's clout. And here's the visual. Rotterdam's docks, ships to Asia, not America. Berlin's startups coding for the world. Spain's solar fields outshining Texas oil rigs. It's not a dream. It's data. EU exports to the US face a 10% hit, 0.2% global GDP, per Euronews. But Mercosur, Asia, Africa plug the gap. US grows fat. Europe grows lean. And here's the gut check. Could this be America's tipping point? 80 years of post-war reign. Dollar king. Hollywood loud. NATO strong. But Europe's not bowing. Von der Leyen's February 24 meeting with Lagarde, per Politico, isn't about rates. It's about supremacy, trade, tech, power, and the numbers scream it. 704 billion green plan, 200 billion tech fund, 100 billion Mercosur gains. Europe's betting the farm. Germany's shaky, France riots over beef imports, per Politico February 20th. But the bloc holds, adapts, wins. So here's the close. What if Europe pulls this off? US growth slows. Tariffs backfire. Europe's single market roars. $25 trillion by 2040. While America scrambles. Is this the end of US dominance, or will they strike back? Think about it. The EU's messy, uneven, but moving. US is mighty, but stalling. Who blinks first? Drop your take in the comments. Could Europe leave America behind? Or is this a blip before the giant wakes? One thing's sure, the world's shifting, and you're watching it happen.